Welcome back. Tonight, we're tracing the lives of every soul who stood against the horrors unleashed by Umbrella Corporation and its successors. From rookie cops to hardened operatives, from ordinary civilians to Delta Force veterans, these are the stories of survival, transformation, and resilience that define the Resident Evil saga. Settle in as we explore the backstories of each protagonist, the moments that forged them, and the nightmares they endured across decades of bioterror. This isn't about gameplay mechanics or puzzle solutions. This is about the people, who they were before the outbreak, what drove them into the fog of biological warfare, and how they carried the weight of what they witnessed. Let the rhythm of these stories carry you into rest, knowing that even in fiction's darkest corners, ordinary people found the courage to fight impossible odds. Rebecca Chambers, the youngest STARS member. Rebecca Chambers was born in 1980, making her only 18 years old when her life changed forever in the Arklay Mountains. Before the nightmare began, she was a prodigy, graduating from university at age 18 with a degree in chemistry, specializing in pharmaceutical sciences. Her exceptional academic achievements and medical knowledge made her an ideal candidate for the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, where she was recruited as the team's field medic and B&E specialist for Bravo Team. Despite her youth and gentle demeanor, Rebecca possessed remarkable courage. She was fresh out of training, inexperienced in real combat situations, yet determined to prove herself worthy of her position. Her teammates viewed her with a mixture of protectiveness and respect. She was brilliant, dedicated, but undeniably green. Rebecca herself harbored insecurities about her age and lack of field experience, constantly working to demonstrate she belonged among veterans twice her age. The events of July 23, 1998, thrust Rebecca into a horror beyond imagination. Bravo Team's helicopter experienced engine failure over the Arklay Mountains, forcing an emergency landing in the forest. The team discovered the overturned military police vehicle transporting convicted prisoner Billy Cohen, but Billy himself was nowhere to be found. As the team split up to investigate, Rebecca stumbled upon the Ecliptic Express. A train stopped dead on the tracks in the middle of the forest. Inside that train, Rebecca found her first corpse, then her second, then realized with mounting dread that the passengers hadn't just died, they'd been transformed into something that shouldn't exist. Zombies, leeches, creatures born from viral experimentation, all trapped in the confined space of train cars. Alone and terrified, Rebecca encountered Billy Cohen, the escaped convict who would become her unlikely partner in survival. Billy Cohen was 26 years old, a former second lieutenant in the Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance. His military record showed exemplary service until July 1998, when he was convicted of murdering 23 people during a mission in Africa and sentenced to death by firing squad. But Billy maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed for a massacre he didn't commit. The truth was darker. His commanding officer had ordered the execution of civilians, and Billy refused. Rather than follow an illegal order, he became the scapegoat, blamed for crimes committed by others. Rebecca and Billy formed an alliance born of necessity. She needed protection. He needed someone who might believe in his innocence. Together they fought through the train as it lurched back to life, heading towards certain destruction. They stopped the locomotive moments before it crashed, then found themselves drawn to an abandoned Umbrella training facility, a place where the company had once conducted illegal experiments under the guise of executive education. The facility revealed the source of the outbreak. Dr. James Marcus, one of Umbrella's founders, had been murdered years ago by his colleagues. but his body had merged with the queen leech he'd been studying, creating a vengeful entity that remembered its death and sought to punish those responsible. This creature had released the T-virus as retribution, transforming the ecliptic express passengers and spreading contamination through the Arklay region. Rebecca and Billy fought through armies of infected, faced mutated horrors, and ultimately destroyed the creature wearing Marcus's face. As the facility collapsed around them, they escaped into the forest. Billy, still technically a fugitive, chose to disappear rather than return to military custody. Rebecca made a decision that would define her character. She reported Billy as dead, giving him the freedom he'd earned through his courage. She took his dog tags as proof, a small deception that granted him a second chance at life. Hours later, exhausted and traumatized, Rebecca reunited with what remained of Bravo team at a mansion in the mountains. She told no one about Billy, keeping his secret even from her teammates. The mansion incident was only beginning, and Rebecca had already been fighting for 2 days straight without rest. But she never hesitated, never broke, never revealed how close she'd come to death on that train. She treated wounded teammates, provided medical support, and proved that her youth didn't equate to weakness. After surviving both the training facility and the Spencer Mansion, Rebecca joined Chris Redfield and the other star survivors in their mission to expose Umbrella. She left the Raccoon City Police Department, dedicating herself to understanding the science behind the bioweapons. Rebecca became a virologist and university professor, using her expertise to develop countermeasures against biological threats. She appeared years later in 2014, consulting on a bioterror incident in New York, her gentle demeanor unchanged, but her eyes carrying the weight of everything she'd witnessed. Rebecca Chambers remained the series' conscience, brilliant, compassionate, and brave, proving that heroism isn't measured in aggression, but in the willingness to stand against horror, even when every instinct screams to run. Billy Cohen, the framed Marine. William Cohen's story is one of betrayal and redemption. Born in 1972, Billy grew up with a strong sense of duty, eventually enlisting in the Marine Corps, where his skills earned him a position in Force Reconnaissance, an elite special operations unit. He excelled in covert operations, deep reconnaissance, and direct action missions. His commanding officers noted his tactical intelligence, physical prowess, and unwavering moral compass. That moral compass became his downfall during a mission in Africa. The operation's details remain classified, but the outcome is documented. 23 civilians were massacred. Billy's unit returned, and someone needed to take the blame. His commanding officer, guilty of ordering the atrocity, instead framed Billy for the crime. Without political connections or the ability to prove his innocence against a superior's word, Billy was convicted by military tribunal and sentenced to execution. During transport to the execution site on July 23, 1998, the military police vehicle carrying Billy crashed in the Arklay Mountains under mysterious circumstances. Handcuffed and alone, Billy escaped into the forest, seeking nothing more than survival. He found the Ecliptic Express, and like Rebecca, discovered its cargo of death. The difference was that Billy had military training and combat experience. He knew how to fight, how to assess tactical situations, and how to survive hostile environments. Meeting Rebecca changed Billy's trajectory. Initially, he saw her as leverage, a hostage if needed, a shield if circumstances demanded. But Rebecca's genuine belief in people, her refusal to judge him based solely on his conviction, and her determination to survive alongside him rather than be protected, earned his respect. Billy found himself protecting her not out of self-interest, but because she represented something he'd lost: faith in human goodness. Their partnership through the training facility forced Billy to confront his own bitterness. He'd been betrayed by the system he served, framed by the officer he trusted, sentenced to death for crimes he didn't commit. That injustice had hardened him, made him cynical and isolated. But watching 18-year-old Rebecca face horrors with courage and compassion reminded Billy why he'd joined the Marines in the first place: to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. When they destroyed the Queen Leech and escaped the facility's destruction, Billy made his choice. He could return to military custody, try again to prove his innocence through a system that had already failed him, or he could accept Rebecca's gift and disappear. He chose freedom, thanking her with genuine gratitude before vanishing into the forest. Billy Cohen's fate after that moment remains unknown, whether he built a new life under a new identity, whether he lived peacefully or continued running. The records don't say. He became a ghost, one man who stood against bioterror before the world knew bioterror existed, and then faded into whatever second chance Rebecca's lie provided. Chris Redfield, from Stars to BSAA founder. Christopher Redfield was born in 1973, growing up with his younger sister Claire in a middle-class American family. Chris's personality was defined early. He had a strong sense of justice, an inability to tolerate corruption, and a protective instinct toward those weaker than himself. These traits led him to the United States Air Force, where he trained as a pilot and demonstrated exceptional skill in aerial combat. But Chris's sense of justice also meant he didn't respond well to corrupt authority. When a superior officer engaged in illegal activities, Chris reported him, expecting the system to function properly. Instead, he faced retaliation and harassment. Rather than endure a hostile environment, Chris left the Air Force, his military career ending not in dishonor, but in disillusionment with institutional corruption. Civilian life didn't suit Chris well. He drifted through odd jobs, unfocused and frustrated, until he met Barry Burton. Barry recognized Chris's skills and character, recommending him for the Special Tactics and Rescue Service being formed in Raccoon City. In 1996, Chris joined STAR's Alpha team as a pointman, finding purpose again in an organization that valued skill and integrity. He befriended Jill Valentine, another recent recruit with a mysterious military background, and the two became close friends through weekly marksmanship training sessions. Chris's life found its rhythm with STARS, conducting high-risk operations, protecting Raccoon City citizens, working alongside competent professionals who shared his values. He had no idea that STARS was being manipulated by Umbrella Corporation, that his team leader Albert Wesker was a double agent, or that the wealthy industrialists funding Raccoon City's development were conducting illegal bioweapons research in the mountains outside town. July 24th, 1998, shattered Chris's world. Bravo team disappeared during a routine investigation in the Arklay Mountains. Alpha team deployed to find them, discovering Bravo's downed helicopter, signs of violence, and a trail leading to an enormous mansion that shouldn't have existed. Inside that mansion, Chris confronted horrors that redefined his understanding of reality: zombies, mutated creatures, victims of viral experimentation, all the products of Umbrella's secret research. Worse than the monsters was the betrayal. Wesker, the captain Chris trusted, revealed himself as Umbrella's agent, deliberately leading STARS into danger as test subjects for bioweapons. Barry Burton, Chris's friend and mentor, had been blackmailed into complicity through threats against his family. The mansion itself was a research facility disguised as a private estate, where umbrella scientist Dr. William Birkin had conducted T-virus experiments on human subjects. Chris fought through the mansion with Jill, Rebecca, and Barry, uncovering documents that proved Umbrella's crimes. They confronted Wesker, who injected himself with an experimental virus and seemingly died during the mansion's self-destruct sequence. The survivors escaped moments before the facility exploded, carrying evidence of Umbrella's illegal research. But victory was hollow. Umbrella's power and influence protected them from prosecution. The evidence stars gathered was dismissed, their testimony discredited, and the Raccoon City Police Department disbanded the stars unit under pressure from Umbrella-controlled politicians. Chris resigned from the RPD, refusing to work for a department compromised by corporate corruption. He dedicated his life to destroying Umbrella. Chris traveled to Europe, infiltrating the corporation's facilities, gathering evidence and conducting guerrilla warfare against their operations. He became obsessed with stopping bioweapons proliferation, his determination hardening into a relentless drive that defined his next 2 decades. In 2003, Chris co-founded the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, the BSAA, an international organization dedicated to combating biological weapons globally. He became one of the organization's most effective operatives, leading missions across multiple continents. His reputation grew. Chris Redfield was the man who'd survived the mansion, who'd faced Wesker multiple times, and lived, who could punch through obstacles with terrifying determination. But that determination came at a cost. Chris's focus on the mission often meant sacrificing personal relationships. His sister Claire worried about his increasingly isolated lifestyle. His partners and teammates saw him take dangerous risks, push himself beyond reasonable limits, and struggle with survivor's guilt when operations went wrong. In 2009, he confronted Wesker for the final time in Africa, killing the man who'd betrayed stars over a decade earlier. Later years brought new challenges. Chris lost entire squads to bioterror attacks, experienced periods of alcoholism and depression, and struggled with the weight of command. He questioned whether his endless war against bioweapons was making a difference or simply perpetuating a cycle of violence. Yet Chris continued fighting because stopping wasn't in his nature. He'd committed himself to protecting people from biological threats, and that commitment remained unbreakable even when hope seemed distant. Chris Redfield became the face of the franchise, appearing in more games than any other protagonist, his story spanning from 1998's Mansion incident through 2017's encounter with bioweapons in Eastern Europe. He aged from an idealistic 25-year-old STARS member into a grizzled veteran approaching 50, his body scarred by decades of combat, his mind haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save, but his determination unwavering. Jill Valentine, Delta Force and the Master of Unlocking. Jill Valentine was born in 1974 to a French father and Japanese mother, giving her a mixed-race background and exposure to multiple cultures from childhood. She grew up in America, where her strong sense of justice and refusal to accept defeat led her to the United States Army. Jill's capabilities caught the attention of Delta Force recruiters, who invited her to participate in an experimental training program designed to assess whether women could serve in special operations units. This classified program, sometimes called the Funny Platoon, put Jill through modified Delta Force selection and assessment. She excelled, demonstrating proficiency in firearms, hand-to-hand combat, explosive ordnance disposal, and an exceptional talent for lockpicking. Jill's training made her one of the most capable special operations soldiers in the U.S. military, but the program remained secret. She was ordered never to confirm or deny her involvement, even to close friends. In 1996, Jill left the military and joined the Raccoon City Police Department's Special Tactics and Rescue Service. She was recruited specifically for her advanced combat skills and became the team's B&E specialist, breaking and entering, lock-picking, bypassing security systems. Officially, Jill claimed she joined STARS because she couldn't tolerate criminals threatening innocent lives. The truth was more complex. She craved experiences that made her feel truly alive, and STARS provided the intensity and purpose she needed. Jill befriended Chris Redfield, one of the few people who knew about her Delta Force background, though even he didn't know the details. They trained together weekly, with Chris helping Jill improve her already impressive marksmanship. She also formed friendships with Barry Burton and other STARS members, finding a sense of belonging in the team. The Spencer Mansion incident on July 24th, 1998, tested everything Jill had learned. When Alpha Team entered that mansion searching for their missing Bravo Team colleagues, Jill faced horrors that military training hadn't prepared her for. Zombies, mutated dogs, hunters, chimeras, biological weapons that defied rational understanding. She navigated the mansion's elaborate security systems, her lock-picking skills essential for accessing sealed areas. But the true horror was Wesker's betrayal. Her team captain had deliberately led them into danger, intending to gather combat data on Umbrella's bioweapons using STARS members as test subjects. Jill's trust was shattered, her faith in authority permanently damaged. She watched Wesker apparently die, helped Barry Burton overcome his guilt for being blackmailed into assisting Wesker, and escaped the mansion's destruction with evidence of Umbrella's crimes. Like Chris, Jill found that evidence meant nothing against Umbrella's political power. The corporation controlled Raccoon City's economy, owned its politicians, and easily discredited STAR survivors as traumatized witnesses whose testimony couldn't be trusted. The police department disbanded STARS, and Jill found herself trapped in a city controlled by the corporation she was trying to expose. She remained in Raccoon City through August and September 1998, gathering more evidence against Umbrella, preparing a case that might finally bring them to justice. But time ran out on September 28th, when the T-virus escaped Umbrella's underground laboratory and spread throughout the city. Within hours, Raccoon City transformed into a nightmare landscape of walking corpses, mutated creatures, and collapsing infrastructure. Jill's escape from Raccoon City became the stuff of legend. For 3 days, she fought through the infected city, hunted by a bioweapon called Nemesis, specifically programmed to eliminate STARS members. Nemesis was relentless, intelligent, and capable of using weapons. It pursued Jill through streets, buildings, and finally a laboratory facility, repeatedly adapting to her tactics. During her escape, Jill was infected by Nemesis and nearly died before Carlos Oliveira, an Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service soldier, found a vaccine and saved her life. She woke from her illness to discover that the U.S. government planned to destroy Raccoon City with a missile strike to contain the outbreak. Jill had hours to escape a city filled with infected, with Nemesis still hunting her and limited supplies. She made it out minutes before the missile struck. On October 1st, 1998, Raccoon City and its 100,000 residents were reduced to a smoking crater. Jill escaped, carrying evidence and testimony that finally began turning public opinion against Umbrella. Her survival, particularly her victory over Nemesis, became one of the franchise's greatest accomplishments, proof that determination and skill could overcome even purpose-built killing machines. After Raccoon City, Jill dedicated herself to destroying Umbrella. She joined Chris in co-founding the BSAA in 2003, becoming one of the organization's most effective operatives. Her missions took her across the globe, fighting bioterror threats and preventing countless outbreaks. But her war against bioweapons came at terrible personal cost. In 2006, Jill encountered Albert Wesker again. He'd survived the mansion incident, enhanced by the virus he'd injected himself with. During a confrontation, Wesker captured Jill, subjecting her to years of experimentation and mind control. He used the P-30 device and a modified virus to turn Jill into his puppet, forcing her to serve the man who'd betrayed Stars. For 3 years, Jill existed in a nightmare of enforced obedience, aware but unable to resist. Chris and his partner Sheva Alomar freed Jill in 2009 during their mission in Africa. Removing the P-30 device broke Wesker's control, allowing Jill to help them defeat him once and for all. But the experience left scars, years of her life stolen, used as a weapon against her friends, forced to commit acts she'd never have chosen. Jill took time to recover, undergoing medical treatment to remove the virus and psychological therapy to process the trauma. She eventually returned to field work, continuing her mission against bioterrorism, but the experience changed her. The woman who'd once craved intensity and danger had learned that some experiences damage rather than enliven, that survival isn't always victory, and that even the strongest soldiers need time to heal. Leon Scott Kennedy. From rookie cop to government agent, Leon Scott Kennedy was born in 1977, growing up with dreams of law enforcement. He wanted to help people, to be the person others called in their darkest moments. Leon attended the police academy, graduating with excellent marks, and applied to police departments across the country. When the Raccoon City Police Department offered him a position, Leon accepted immediately, thrilled to begin his career in law enforcement. His first day was scheduled for September 28, 1998. Leon prepared carefully, reviewing department protocols, studying Raccoon City's layout, mentally preparing for his first day as a professional police officer. He was 21 years old, idealistic, naive, and completely unprepared for what awaited him. The drive into Raccoon City should have been routine. Instead, Leon found abandoned cars on the highway, evidence of chaos, and eventually corpses on the road. He stopped to investigate, checking for survivors, trying to understand what had happened. That's when he encountered his first zombie, a person who shouldn't have been moving, who attacked with inhuman strength and couldn't be stopped by reasoning or warning shots. Leon fought his way into Raccoon City proper, discovering that the entire city had been overrun by infected. The police department, his new workplace, was a slaughterhouse. Corpses filled the halls, survivors were few, and the building itself was compromised. In the chaos, Leon met Claire Redfield, who'd come to Raccoon City searching for her brother Chris. Together, they fled to the police station, hoping to find safety and answers. The police station offered neither. Instead, Leon discovered evidence of Umbrella's crimes, encountered survivors fighting impossible odds, and learned that the outbreak originated from the company's underground research facility. He met Ada Wong, a woman claiming to be looking for her boyfriend, and found himself drawn to her despite circumstances that left little room for romance. He protected Sherry Birkin, a young girl whose father's transformation into a monstrous creature made her a target. For 2 days, Leon fought through Raccoon City. He battled zombies, lickers, the tyrant Mr. X, and eventually Sherry's mutated father in Umbrella's underground laboratory. He witnessed Ada fall from a EA platform, apparently killed by the same mission that brought her to Raccoon City. He helped Claire and Sherry escape on an underground train moments before the facility self-destructed. They reached the military quarantine perimeter on September 30th, expecting rescue. Instead, Leon and Sherry were separated from Claire and taken into custody by government agents. Sherry, infected with her father's G virus, became a research subject and guinea pig for scientists studying the virus's effects. Leon, who'd survived the outbreak and knew too much about Umbrella's operations, was given an ultimatum by Adam Benford, a high-ranking government official. The choice was simple: agree to work for a classified anti-bioterror program answering directly to the president, or face potential elimination as a security risk. In exchange for Leon's service, Sherry would be protected and treated humanely rather than becoming a simple test subject. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Leon agreed, trading his freedom and future for Sherry's safety. What followed was brutal transformation. The naive rookie cop who'd driven into Raccoon City died with that city. In his place, the government forged a special operations agent through years of intensive training under Operative Jack Krauser. Leon learned advanced combat techniques, tactical operations, weapons expertise, and the political realities of bioterrorism. He became cynical, hardened, losing the idealism that had drawn him to law enforcement. By 2004, Leon was no longer a rookie. When the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, was kidnapped by a cult in Spain, Leon was sent to rescue her. The mission took him to a remote village infected with Las Plagas parasites that turned humans into puppets controlled by the cult leader. Leon fought through armies of infected villagers, castle guards, and ultimately confronted his former instructor, Jack Krauser, who'd betrayed the government to work for the cult. Leon rescued Ashley, destroyed the cult, and returned to government service more jaded than before. He encountered Ada Wong again, discovering she'd survived Raccoon City and worked as a mercenary and spy for various organizations. Their relationship remained complicated, attraction mixed with mistrust, genuine connection undermined by conflicting loyalties, and Ada's refusal to abandon her mercenary lifestyle. Over the following years, Leon became one of the government's most valuable operatives. He investigated bioterror incidents across the globe, worked alongside Claire Redfield during a 2005 outbreak at an airport, and eventually became a cynical veteran comfortable with morally gray operations. By 2013, when bioterrorists unleashed a global outbreak, Leon had spent 15 years fighting biological threats. His personality transformed from hopeful rookie into sarcastic, bitter agent who'd seen too much horror. But beneath the cynicism remained the core of the man who'd driven into Raccoon City wanting to help people. Leon continued accepting dangerous missions, continued putting himself between civilians and bioweapons, continued fighting even when victory seemed impossible. He formed genuine friendships with Chris Redfield and other veterans of the bioterror wars, finding common ground in shared trauma. His relationship with Ada remained unresolved. She repeatedly helped him during critical moments, then disappeared back into her shadowy world of corporate espionage. Leon Scott Kennedy's story became one of lost innocence and persistent dedication. The rookie cop died in Raccoon City, but what emerged was someone who fought not because he believed in systems or institutions, but because individual lives mattered. Even after decades of government service forced on him through coercion, Leon never stopped being the person who'd protect a child like Sherry or save a president's daughter like Ashley, regardless of personal cost. Claire Redfield, the ordinary hero. Claire Redfield was born in 1979, growing up as Chris Redfield's younger sister. She idolized her older brother, who joined the Air Force and later stars, becoming everything Claire associated with strength and heroism. But Claire's path was different. She attended college, studied liberal arts, lived a normal life that didn't involve military service or law enforcement. By September 1998, Claire was a 19-year-old college student enjoying life with her friends at university. She hadn't heard from Chris in weeks, which was unusual. Her brother typically called regularly to check on her. Concerned, Claire borrowed a motorcycle and drove to Raccoon City, intending to visit Chris at his star's office and make sure everything was okay. She arrived September 29th, hours after Leon Kennedy, and like him, Claire found herself in the middle of a nightmare. The city was overrun, the streets filled with infected, and her brother nowhere to be found. Claire fought her way to the police station, encountering Leon and forming an immediate partnership born of shared desperation. They split up to search the building, with Claire taking responsibility for finding Chris, while Leon looked for other survivors. What made Claire remarkable was her complete lack of training. She wasn't a cop like Leon, wasn't a soldier like Chris, had no special operations background or combat experience. She was a college student with a motorcycle and determination, facing bioweapons with improvised tactics and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Claire picked up weapons she'd never trained with, navigated environments designed to kill her, and kept moving forward because stopping meant death. She found Sherry Birkin, a young girl hiding in the police station, frightened and alone. Claire immediately took responsibility for protecting Sherry, forming a maternal bond with the child despite their age difference. When Sherry revealed that her parents worked for Umbrella, Claire didn't blame the girl for her parents' crimes. She simply focused on keeping Sherry alive. That protection became Claire's driving motivation. Sherry's father, William Birkin, had injected himself with the G virus, transforming into a monstrous creature that pursued them through sewers and laboratories. Umbrella operatives wanted to recover Sherry for experimentation. The city itself was falling apart around them, but Claire never abandoned the girl, never considered leaving her to save herself, never stopped fighting for both their survival. Claire's escape from Raccoon City with Sherry and Leon cemented her character. She was someone who protected the vulnerable regardless of personal cost. After the city's destruction, Claire couldn't return to normal college life. She'd seen what bioweapons could do, witnessed the suffering caused by corporate negligence, and felt compelled to act. She joined TerraSave, a human rights organization providing relief and aid to victims of bioterrorism. The work took Claire across the globe, helping survivors of outbreaks, documenting corporate crimes, and advocating for victims' rights. She wasn't hunting bioterrorists like Chris or working for the government like Leon. She was helping the people left behind after the fighting stopped, the survivors who needed someone to care about their suffering. Claire's work brought her into conflict with bioterrorists multiple times. In 2000, she investigated Umbrella's Antarctic research facility, searching for information about Chris and uncovering more evidence of the corporation's crimes. In 2005, she survived an outbreak at an airport, working alongside Leon to stop the spread of T-virus. In 2011, she was kidnapped by a cult conducting fear-based psychological experiments, forced to protect Moira Burton while navigating a nightmarish facility. Through every encounter, Claire remained fundamentally unchanged. She was the person who protected children, who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves, who retained hope and compassion even surrounded by horror. Unlike Chris's hardening into a relentless warrior or Leon's cynicism, Claire maintained her core identity as someone who believed people were worth saving. Her relationship with her brother remained complicated. Chris was proud of Claire's strength, but constantly worried about her safety, often treating her like the younger sister who needed protection rather than the capable survivor she'd proven herself to be. Claire resented the overprotectiveness while understanding its source. They'd both lost too much to bioterrorism, and Chris's fear of losing his sister drove his sometimes overbearing concern. Claire's story represented something essential in the Resident Evil universe, that heroism doesn't require military training or government authority. Sometimes it simply requires an ordinary person who refuses to abandon those in need, who faces horror with determination and compassion, who survives not through superior firepower, but through absolute refusal to quit. Claire Redfield was the heart of the franchise, the reminder that behind all the tactical operations and biological warfare were real people suffering real consequences, and someone needed to care about them. Ada Wong, the spy in Red. Ada Wong's true history remains shrouded in mystery and deliberate misdirection. Even her real name is uncertain. Ada Wong may be an alias, one of many identities she's adopted over years of espionage. What is known suggests a woman born in the 1970s who became one of the world's most effective corporate spies and mercenaries, selling her services to various organizations without permanent loyalty to any. By 1998, Ada had established a reputation in the shadowy world of industrial espionage. When Umbrella Corporation's G-Virus research promised revolutionary bioweapon potential, multiple organizations wanted samples. Ada was hired to infiltrate Raccoon City and extract G-Virus data before Umbrella could secure it. The mission seemed straightforward. Get in, acquire the target, get out before anyone noticed. But Ada arrived September 29th, hours after the T-Virus outbreak transformed Raccoon City into a war zone. Her mission parameters hadn't included navigating a city of infected, fighting through bioweapons, or dealing with survivors complicating her extraction. Ada adapted, using her training and natural deception to navigate the chaos. She encountered Leon Kennedy in the police station, immediately recognizing him as useful. Ada crafted a cover story. She was searching for her boyfriend John, an Umbrella researcher who'd gone missing. The lie was effective, playing on Leon's idealism and desire to help. He believed her completely, never questioning her story, and Ada found herself with an unexpected ally who provided protection while she searched for her true target. What Ada didn't anticipate was genuinely liking Leon. He was naive, idealistic, honest in ways that didn't exist in her world of lies and betrayal. His earnest desire to help everyone, his refusal to abandon people even when tactically foolish, his genuine goodness, all of it appealed to something in Ada that her mercenary lifestyle had nearly killed. She found herself protecting him when professional coldness would have served better, helping him when abandoning him would have been safer. Ada successfully acquired the G-Virus sample, completing her mission, but Leon's presence complicated everything. When Ada fell from a platform during a confrontation with the tyrant Mr. X, Leon believed she died. He grieved for the woman he'd known for less than 2 days, the loss hitting him harder than circumstances warranted. But Ada survived, using her intelligence agency's resources to escape Raccoon City with the G-Virus sample intact. Her survival remained secret. Ada allowed Leon to believe she died, understanding that her continued existence would only bring him pain. She delivered the G-Virus to her employers and moved on to the next mission, burying whatever feelings Leon had stirred. But those feelings didn't disappear. They complicated every subsequent encounter. In 2004, Ada was operating in Spain when Leon's mission to rescue Ashley Graham brought them together again. Ada was working for Albert Wesker, assigned to acquire a Las Plagas parasite sample from the cult that had kidnapped the president's daughter. Seeing Leon again forced Ada to confront the reality that her feelings hadn't faded. If anything, they'd intensified during 6 years of separation. Ada helped Leon repeatedly during the Spain mission, even when doing so contradicted her orders or endangered her own objectives. She saved him from execution, provided weapons and supplies, and ultimately chose to destroy the cult's operations rather than allow Leon to be killed. Even though that decision cost her Wesker's favor, she acquired the Plagas sample and escaped, but not before Leon realized she was alive and working angles he couldn't fully understand. Their relationship remained defined by near misses and conflicting loyalties. Ada cared for Leon genuinely, but refused to abandon her mercenary lifestyle. She worked for the highest bidder, acquired bioweapon samples for organizations Leon fought against, and operated in moral gray zones that Leon's sense of justice couldn't accept. Yet she repeatedly helped him during critical moments, her actions often protecting him, even when her words suggested indifference. Ada's work took her across the globe over the following years. She acquired bioweapon samples, conducted corporate espionage, worked for organizations known only as the Agency and other shadowy employers. Her skills made her invaluable. She could infiltrate any facility, charm or seduce targets as needed, fight with deadly efficiency when confrontation became unavoidable, and disappear without trace when missions concluded. But Ada's story remained fundamentally one of isolation. She formed no lasting relationships, maintained no permanent loyalties, trusted no one completely. Her professional identity required constant deception, making genuine connection impossible. Leon represented the life she might have lived in different circumstances: honesty, integrity, connection. But Ada had made her choices years ago, and changing course seemed impossible. By 2013, Ada was still operating in the bioterror underworld, her reputation enhanced by decades of successful operations. She remained beautiful, deadly, mysterious, and alone, exactly what her profession demanded. Her encounters with Leon continued to be charged with unresolved tension, attraction mixed with fundamental incompatibility. He wanted her to change. She wanted him to accept her as she was. Neither was willing to compromise, leaving their relationship perpetually unresolved. Ada Wong represented something unique in the franchise: moral ambiguity personified. She wasn't heroic like Chris or Claire, wasn't driven by justice like Leon or Jill. She was a mercenary who sold bioweapon data to the highest bidder, contributing to the proliferation of weapons that killed thousands. Yet she wasn't evil. She had lines she wouldn't cross, people she protected, moments of genuine humanity that complicated any simple judgment of her character. Barry Burton, the family man. Barry Burton was born in 1960, making him one of the older STARS members, and a veteran by the time younger recruits like Chris and Jill joined. Barry's background included extensive military service, where he developed expertise in weapons and firearms that became his defining characteristic. His knowledge of guns was encyclopedic. He could identify any weapon by sight, maintain and customize firearms to maximize performance, and shoot with precision that came from decades of practice. But Barry's defining characteristic wasn't his weapons expertise, it was his family. Barry was married to Kathy and had 2 daughters, Moira and Polly. Unlike many of his STARS colleagues, Barry's motivation for being in law enforcement wasn't personal trauma or idealism. It was simply providing for his family and protecting his community. He was fundamentally a good man who wanted to go home to his wife and daughters every night, which made what happened during the Spencer Mansion incident all the more tragic. When Alpha Team entered the mansion on July 24th, 1998, Barry was separated from the group early. Albert Wesker, knowing Barry's devotion to his family, confronted him with evidence that Umbrella had identified his wife and daughters. The threat was implicit but clear: cooperate or watch your family suffer. Barry, faced with an impossible choice, agreed to assist Wesker's plans, believing he could protect both his family and his teammates. The reality was messier. Wesker ordered Barry to manipulate Jill Valentine, leading her into specific areas and ensuring she triggered certain events necessary for Wesker's research data collection. Barry provided Jill with weapons and supplies, ostensibly helping her, while actually furthering Wesker's agenda. The guilt consumed him. Barry was fundamentally loyal, and betraying his team violated everything he believed. Eventually, Barry confessed to Jill, revealing Wesker's blackmail and begging for understanding. Jill, seeing Barry's genuine remorse and recognizing he'd been manipulated through his family, forgave him. Together with Chris and Rebecca, they confronted Wesker and escaped the mansion. But the experience scarred Barry deeply. He'd been forced to choose between his team and his family, and while he'd ultimately done the right thing, the fact that he'd compromised at all haunted him. After Raccoon City's destruction and Umbrella's eventual collapse, Barry retired from active field work. He focused on his family, trying to provide stability for his daughters and help them process the trauma of knowing their father had been targeted by a bioterror corporation. He consulted occasionally on anti-bioterror operations, providing his weapons expertise, but stayed away from active combat missions. That retirement ended in 2011 when Moira, now an adult working for TerraSave, was kidnapped alongside Claire Redfield. Barry received a message indicating his daughter was being held on an isolated island used for psychological experiments. Without hesitation, Barry traveled to the island, determined to rescue Moira regardless of the danger. The island was a nightmare of infected creatures and psychological manipulation. Barry fought through it alone, his age and decades-old combat training tested against modern bioweapons. He was 51 years old, no longer the fast operator he'd been at STARS, but determination and sheer stubbornness carried him forward. He found Moira, who'd been forced to confront her fear of guns, a fear resulting from a childhood accident involving one of Barry's weapons. Their reunion was emotional and complicated. Moira resented her father for the weapons obsession that had led to her trauma, while Barry struggled with guilt over failing to protect his daughter from both the childhood accident and the current nightmare. They worked together to escape the island, their relationship strained, but ultimately surviving the ordeal. Barry Burton's story was about ordinary heroism. He wasn't superhuman like Chris, or stylish like Leon. He was a middle-aged father with a dad bod and terrible puns, whose greatest fear was failing his family. His famous Jill sandwich line became a meme, but beneath the awkward dialogue was a man who'd risked everything to save his partner. Barry represented the working-class hero, the person who showed up, did the job, and went home to his family, finding courage not in ideology, but in love for the people depending on him. Ethan Winters, the everyman protagonist. Ethan Winters was born in the 1980s, living an ordinary life that exemplified normal middle-class American existence. He worked as a systems engineer, married his wife Mia, and built a quiet life focused on career and relationship rather than adventure. Ethan wasn't a soldier, cop, or special operations veteran. He was genuinely ordinary, someone who'd never fired a gun in anger, never faced life-threatening situations, never imagined his life would intersect with bioterrorism. That changed in October 2017 when Ethan received a message from Mia, who'd been missing for 3 years and presumed dead. The message was cryptic, but clearly from his wife, originating from Louisiana. Ethan immediately traveled to the address, desperate to understand what had happened and hoping for reunion. He found the Baker family plantation, a dilapidated property in the bayou that radiated wrongness. Inside, Ethan discovered Mia chained in the basement, traumatized and barely coherent. Their reunion was brief. Mia attacked him with shocking violence, forcing Ethan to defend himself against his own wife. She injured him severely, cutting off his left hand with a chainsaw before apparently returning to herself and helping him escape. What followed was 3 days of sustained horror. The Baker family, Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and their elderly grandmother, had been infected by a bioweapon called Eveline, a genetically engineered girl designed to control people through a special mold. The Bakers hunted Ethan through their property, displaying supernatural abilities, shrugging off injuries that should have been fatal, and repeatedly capturing him for dinner table nightmares. Ethan's survival came not from training, but from sheer determination and the ability to endure horrific injuries. His hand was severed and reattached with staples and first aid liquid. He was stabbed, shot, mutilated, and tortured, but kept moving forward because stopping meant abandoning Mia. He learned to use weapons through necessity, his aim terrible but adequate at close range. He solved puzzles through trial and error, navigated the plantation through methodical exploration, and eventually discovered the truth about Eveline and the Baker family. The Bakers were victims, infected against their will by Eveline's influence. Jack Baker had been a good man before infection, trying to resist even as the mold consumed his mind. Marguerite had been a loving mother driven insane by parasitic insects spawned from her infected body. Only Lucas had embraced the infection, his pre-existing sadistic tendencies amplified by Eveline's control. Ethan killed the Baker family members one by one, each death a mercy for people who'd become monsters against their will. He freed Zoe Baker, the family's daughter, who'd somehow resisted complete infection, and ultimately chose to cure Mia rather than Zoe with the limited serum available. The choice haunted him. Saving his wife meant abandoning another victim to continue suffering. With BSAA assistance, Ethan destroyed Eveline, the child bioweapon responsible for the Baker family's nightmare. He rescued Mia and escaped Louisiana, believing the horror was finally over. The government relocated them to Eastern Europe, providing new identities and attempting to help them rebuild their lives. Mia became pregnant, giving birth to their daughter Rosemary, and for a few years it seemed Ethan had successfully returned to normalcy, but Mia kept secrets. Ethan had died during his first encounter with Jack Baker. The injury should have been fatal. The mold had infected him, reconstructing his body and keeping him alive through the same mechanism that sustained the Bakers. Ethan was essentially undead, kept alive by Eveline's creation, though he remained unaware of his condition. Mia knew, but never told him, fearing what that knowledge would do to his mental state. In 2021, their peaceful life in Eastern Europe shattered when Mia was apparently killed by Chris Redfield, who then kidnapped Rosemary. Ethan pursued them, desperate to understand why Chris would betray them, only to discover that the woman he'd thought was Mia for several months had actually been Mother Miranda, an ancient bioweapon researcher who'd assumed Mia's form to steal Rosemary. Miranda was a predecessor to Umbrella, a scientist who discovered the mold decades earlier and spent nearly a century trying to resurrect her dead daughter. She believed Rosemary, born from mold-infected parents, could serve as the perfect vessel for her daughter's rebirth. The entire village around Miranda's laboratory had been infected with parasitic creatures she'd created, turning the population into her unwilling subjects. Ethan fought through the village, confronting 4 lords who served Miranda, Lady Dimitrescu, a vampire-like aristocrat commanding her daughters in a massive castle, Donna Beneviento, a doll maker whose hallucinations nearly drove Ethan insane, Salvatore Moreau, a fish-like creature desperate for Miranda's approval, and Carl Heisenberg, a magnetically powered engineer who saw Ethan as a potential ally against Miranda. Each encounter pushed Ethan beyond his limits. He wasn't getting better at combat. He remained clumsy, desperate, barely adequate, but his determination never wavered, driven entirely by parental love. When Miranda captured Rosemary and began the ritual to use her as a vessel, Ethan's mold-infected body was failing, his regeneration exhausted by too many injuries. Chris Redfield arrived with BSAA support, but it was Ethan who confronted Miranda in her final form. The fight nearly killed him, his body literally falling apart as the mold's regenerative power reached its limit. But Ethan destroyed Miranda, rescued Rosemary, and carried his daughter to safety even as his own body disintegrated. The village's megamesete, the source of all the mold infections, was about to explode, requiring someone to manually trigger the detonation. Ethan handed Rosemary to Chris, made peace with his imminent death, and stayed behind to ensure the destruction was complete. He died, destroying the megamycete, his final words transmitted to Mia through Chris's communication system. Rosemary grew up without her father, raised by Mia with Chris Redfield serving as mentor and trainer. In 2037, 16-year-old Rose entered the realm of the megamycete seeking to remove her mold-based powers, which had made her an outcast among normal children. Inside that realm, she met a presence calling himself Michael, who guided and protected her through various trials. Only at the end did Rose realize Michael was her father, a remnant of Ethan's consciousness preserved in the megamycete, waiting to help his daughter one final time. He aided Rose in defeating Miranda's remnant and accepting her powers as part of who she was. After ensuring Rose's safety, Ethan's consciousness faded completely, his existence ending not in the village explosion but in this final act of paternal love. Ethan Winters represented something new for Resident Evil, a protagonist who remained ordinary throughout his story. He never became a capable action hero, never developed impressive combat skills, never joined an anti-bioterror organization. He was simply a father who loved his family enough to endure any horror, face any monster, and ultimately sacrifice himself for his daughter's future. His story demonstrated that heroism doesn't require transformation. Sometimes it simply requires an ordinary person refusing to quit, regardless of the cost. Sheva Alomar, BSAA's African operative. Sheva Alomar was born in 1986 in a small village within Africa's interior. Her early childhood was peaceful until she was 8 years old when tragedy struck her village. An Umbrella Corporation test site was located nearby, and when an outbreak occurred at the facility, bioweapons escaped and attacked Sheva's home. Her parents were killed in the attack, leaving Sheva orphaned and traumatized. She was evacuated along with other survivors, eventually placed with a family in the United States. Growing up as a refugee and orphan shaped Sheva's worldview. She understood viscerally what bioweapons cost ordinary people, the suffering caused by corporations treating human lives as acceptable losses during weapons testing. As she matured, Sheva became determined to fight back against the bioterror industry. In 2003, when the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance was formed, Sheva immediately sought to join. She was 17, barely old enough for consideration, but her language skills, knowledge of African geography, and personal motivation made her an ideal candidate for operations on the continent. Sheva completed BSAA training and became one of the organization's operatives, specializing in African bioterror threats. By 2009, Sheva had become an experienced field agent, known for her competence and dedication. When intelligence suggested that bioweapons were being sold in West Africa, Sheva was assigned to investigate alongside Chris Redfield, the BSAA's most famous operative. Their partnership was initially professional. Chris was focused on finding his missing partner, Jill Valentine, while Sheva was determined to prevent bioweapons proliferation in her home continent. The mission revealed a massive conspiracy. Albert Wesker, long believed dead, was alive and orchestrating a plan to release a virus that would infect most of the world's population, culling humanity to create what he considered a superior species. He'd established operations in Africa, selling bioweapons to fund his research while preparing his ultimate virus for global release. Sheva and Chris fought through infected villages, mining facilities, and research laboratories, uncovering the scope of Wesker's plan. They discovered that Jill Valentine was alive, brainwashed and controlled by Wesker through a device implanted in her chest. Sheva helped Chris free Jill from mind control, then continued pursuing Wesker as he attempted to escape with his ultimate virus. The final confrontation took place on an aircraft over an active volcano. Wesker, enhanced by viruses that gave him superhuman strength and speed, nearly killed both Sheva and Chris multiple times. But Sheva's agility and Chris's determination, combined with Jill's assistance, allowed them to weaken Wesker enough to force him into the volcano. Sheva and Chris fired rocket launchers at Wesker, finally destroying him once and for all. The mission succeeded. Wesker was dead, his virus destroyed, and the bioterror threat neutralized. But victory came at tremendous cost. During the mission, Sheva witnessed the true scale of bioterror's impact on her home continent. Villages transformed into test sites, civilians used as guinea pigs, children infected and mutated for research data. The horrors she joined BSAA to prevent had already claimed countless African lives before she could stop them. After the mission, Sheva continued serving with the BSAA, though her partnership with Chris was complicated by his ongoing trauma and survivor's guilt. She understood his pain but couldn't fully reach him through the walls he'd built. Sheva remained committed to protecting Africa from bioterror threats, using her experience and skills to save others from the fate her village suffered years earlier. Sheva Alomar represented something important in the franchise, proof that bioterror's victims could become its most effective opponents. She transformed personal tragedy into professional dedication, using her pain as motivation rather than letting it consume her. Her story showed that heroism could emerge from any background, that survivors of atrocity could find purpose in preventing others from suffering similar fates. Carlos Oliveira, the UBCS mercenary who found his conscience. Carlos Oliveira was born in 1977, growing up in South America during a period of political instability and conflict. As a young man, Carlos joined an anti-government guerrilla movement, fighting against what he believed was corrupt authority. The details of his guerrilla activities remain classified, but the outcome is documented. His movement failed, Carlos was captured, and rather than face execution or imprisonment, he was sold to Umbrella Corporation, Umbrella recruited Carlos into the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, the UBCS, a private military company staffed primarily with mercenaries who had no better options. The UBCS served two purposes: providing plausible deniability for Umbrella's cleanup operations during outbreaks, and serving as test subjects for bioweapon effectiveness. Most UBCS soldiers didn't realize they were expendable, that their employers viewed them as little more than guinea pigs with guns. Carlos was assigned to Delta Platoon as a heavy weapons specialist and rear security. He trained extensively with various firearms, learning maintenance and tactical deployment. By September 1998, Carlos was 21 years old, a competent soldier comfortable with violence, but largely unaware of Umbrella's true nature. He believed the UBCS was a legitimate rescue organization, that they'd been deployed to Raccoon City to save civilians from a biohazard outbreak. The reality became clear within hours of deployment. The T-virus had transformed Raccoon City into a nightmare landscape. Umbrella had no intention of rescuing civilians. They were gathering combat data on bioweapon effectiveness and eliminating evidence of their illegal research. Carlos and the other UBCS soldiers were sent into an impossible situation with inadequate information, insufficient resources, and orders that made no tactical sense. Delta Platoon was decimated within the first day. Carlos watched his teammates die, torn apart by zombies or killed by the tyrant bioweapon nemesis that hunted STAR's members through the city. He realized Umbrella had abandoned them, that no rescue was coming, that he'd been used and discarded by the corporation he'd served. In the chaos, Carlos encountered Jill Valentine, a former STARS member fighting to escape the city. His first instinct was to help her. Carlos might have been a mercenary, but he wasn't callous. Couldn't watch someone die when he had the ability to intervene. They formed an alliance born of shared desperation, Carlos providing firepower and support, while Jill provided tactical expertise and knowledge of Umbrella's operations. Their partnership transformed Carlos. Jill represented something he'd never encountered in his military experience. Someone fighting not for money or orders, but because protecting others was simply the right thing to do. Her determination to save civilians, her refusal to abandon people even when tactically disadvantageous, her genuine heroism without pretense, all of it challenged Carlos's cynical worldview. When Nemesis infected Jill with the T-virus, Carlos refused to let her die. He fought through Raccoon City Hospital, searching for a vaccine sample, risking his life repeatedly to save someone he'd known for less than 2 days. He found the vaccine, administered it, and stayed with Jill while she recovered, protecting her from infected and bioweapons until the treatment took effect. Carlos's decision to save Jill rather than simply escape the city defined his character. He could have abandoned her, taken care of himself, focused solely on survival. Instead, he chose to risk everything for another person, demonstrating that beneath the mercenary exterior was someone capable of genuine heroism and self-sacrifice. After Jill recovered, they continued fighting through Raccoon City together. Carlos learned the full extent of Umbrella's crimes, discovered that his employers had deliberately created the outbreak, realized that every death in Raccoon City was on Umbrella's hands. The knowledge transformed his perspective. He wasn't a soldier serving a legitimate organization. He was a mercenary who'd been duped into serving bioterrorists. Carlos and Jill escaped Raccoon City on October 1st, minutes before the government missile strike destroyed the city. They survived, carrying evidence of Umbrella's crimes and testimony that would help expose the corporation's illegal activities. But Carlos was left without direction. He'd betrayed Umbrella, had no other military contacts, and carried guilt over serving a bioterrorist corporation even unknowingly. His fate after Raccoon City remains somewhat unclear. Carlos disappeared from public record, presumably going into hiding or adopting a new identity to avoid umbrella retaliation. Some reports suggest he continued working with Jill and other Star survivors to expose Umbrella, using his knowledge of the corporation's military operations to assist their investigation. Others indicate he simply vanished, choosing a quiet life away from bioterror and military conflict. What's certain is that Carlos Oliveira's story represented redemption. He started as a mercenary fighting for pay, someone who'd killed for political causes and served corporations without questioning their ethics. His experience in Raccoon City transformed him, forcing recognition that some causes are worth fighting for beyond money, that protecting innocent lives matters more than following orders, and that heroism sometimes means rejecting everything you've built to do the right thing. Jake Muller, Albert Wesker's son. Jake Muller was born around 1980 in Edonia, a small Eastern European nation characterized by poverty and political instability. His mother had emigrated to the United States in her early 20s, where she met and had a relationship with Albert Wesker. She became pregnant but never told Wesker about the child, breaking off their relationship and returning to Edonia before Jake's birth. Jake grew up never knowing his father, raised by a single mother who struggled with chronic illness. They lived in poverty, barely affording daily necessities, let alone the medical treatment that could have cured her condition. Jake's mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for him, and Jake loved her fiercely for her sacrifices. But he resented the father who'd abandoned them, the man his mother still spoke of with affection despite his absence. As Jake grew older, he took on whatever work he could find to support his mother and afford her medical care. In Edonia's unstable political environment, the work available to a young man with no education or connections was limited. Jake joined an anti-government guerrilla movement, becoming a mercenary who sold his combat skills to whoever could pay. He was good at violence, discovered he had natural abilities that made him an exceptional fighter. Faster reflexes than his peers, stronger than his size suggested, able to recover from injuries more quickly than seemed normal. Jake didn't know these abilities came from his genetic heritage, that his father had been infected with viruses that altered his DNA and passed modified genetics to his son. Simply used his advantages to survive, building a reputation as an effective mercenary. By 2012, Jake was working in Edonia during a bioterror outbreak, fighting alongside rebels against the government when a woman named Sherry Birkin approached him with an offer. The United States government needed Jake's blood. A new virus called C virus was spreading globally, and Jake's unique genetic makeup made him naturally immune. His blood could be synthesized into a vaccine that would save millions of lives. In exchange for his cooperation, Jake would be paid $50 million, enough money to solve every problem he'd ever faced, to secure his future permanently. Jake agreed, motivated entirely by the money. He didn't care about saving the world or fighting bioterrorism. He wanted financial security, the ability to finally live comfortably after years of poverty and violence. But circumstances forced Jake and Sherry to fight their way out of Edonia as the bioterror outbreak escalated around them. They were pursued by a bioweapon called Ustanak, a creature specifically designed to capture Jake alive for experimentation. During their escape, Jake learned the truth about his father. Albert Wesker hadn't simply abandoned Jake's mother. He'd been one of history's most dangerous bioterrorists, responsible for countless deaths and attempting global genocide before being killed in 2009. Jake's genetic advantages came from Wesker's virus-altered DNA, making him literally the son of a monster. The revelation shattered Jake's understanding of himself. He'd spent his life resenting his absent father, never imagining the man was actually a mass murderer. The knowledge that he carried Wesker's blood, that his very existence was tied to bioterrorism, forced Jake to confront uncomfortable questions about inheritance and identity. Was he destined to become like his father? Did genetics determine morality? Or could he choose a different path? Sherry became Jake's anchor during this crisis. She'd grown up as a government test subject after Raccoon City, used for experimentation because of the G virus in her body. She understood what it meant to be defined by biology rather than choice, to carry something inside you that others wanted to exploit. She treated Jake as a person rather than a commodity or a villain's offspring, forming a genuine friendship based on mutual understanding. Their partnership deepened as they fought through multiple countries, pursued by Ustanak and bioterrorists who wanted Jake's blood for their own purposes. Jake discovered he actually cared about Sherry's survival, that her death would matter to him beyond losing his $50 million payday. He risked his life protecting her repeatedly, demonstrating that his father's selfishness and cruelty weren't inevitably inherited. Eventually, Jake and Sherry reached a Neo-Umbrella research facility where Carla Radames, the scientist who'd created the C virus, attempted to extract Jake's blood. Through lethal experimentation, Jake fought back, destroyed the facility, and ultimately donated his blood voluntarily to create the vaccine. But when payment time came, Jake refused the $50 million. Instead, he asked for $50, a symbolic gesture indicating his motivation had changed. Jake had started the mission focused entirely on money, viewing his blood as a commodity to be sold. He ended it recognizing that some things mattered more than personal profit, that his genetics didn't define his character, and that choosing to help others made him fundamentally different from his father despite sharing DNA. Jake Muller's story was about escaping predetermined identity. He could have embraced his heritage, used his abilities for selfish purposes, allowed his father's legacy to define him. Instead, he chose compassion over cruelty, sacrifice over selfishness, demonstrating that biology isn't destiny and that who you become depends on the choices you make rather than the circumstances of your birth. Piers Nivens, Chris Redfield's chosen successor. Piers Nivens was born in 1987, growing up during the period when Umbrella Corporation's crimes were first being exposed. He joined the United States Army as a young man, demonstrating exceptional marksmanship and tactical intelligence. Piers became a sniper, perfecting skills that made him one of the military's most effective long-range specialists. In 2010, Chris Redfield personally recruited Piers into the BSAA. Chris was approaching 40, beginning to think about succession planning and the organization's future leadership. He recognized that he couldn't remain a field operative indefinitely, that the BSAA needed younger operatives who could carry on the mission after the original founders retired. Piers represented everything Chris valued: skill, dedication, tactical excellence, and genuine commitment to protecting people from bioterror threats. Piers joined the BSAA's elite alpha team, working directly under Chris's command. He respected Chris enormously, viewing him as the legendary operative who'd fought Umbrella from the beginning, who'd survived countless bioterror incidents, and who represented the best of what the BSAA could be. Piers determined to prove himself worthy of Chris's faith, to become the leader Chris believed he could be. Their partnership was tested in 2012 during a mission in Edonia. Chris led his team into a bioterror outbreak, intending to eliminate the source and prevent further spread. But the mission went catastrophically wrong. Chris's entire team, except for Piers, was killed by a bioweapon attack. Chris himself was injured and suffered traumatic amnesia, disappearing after the mission's failure and spending 6 months drinking himself into oblivion, unable to remember what had happened or cope with the guilt of losing his team. Piers found Chris in a bar in Eastern Europe, confronting him with the reality that he was needed. A new bioterror threat had emerged. The C virus was spreading globally, and the BSAA needed their best operative back in action. Chris, still suffering amnesia and drowning in alcohol-fueled despair, initially refused, but Piers persisted, essentially dragging Chris back to duty through sheer determination and appeals to Chris's sense of responsibility. As they investigated the C virus outbreak in Lanxiang, China, Chris's memories gradually returned. He remembered watching his team die, remembered his failure to protect them, and the guilt nearly destroyed him. Chris wanted to quit, to walk away from a mission that had cost him too much. Piers refused to let him, reminding Chris that more people would die if they abandoned the fight, that their fallen teammates would have wanted them to complete the mission. Their relationship during this mission revealed Piers's character. He wasn't blindly following orders or hero-worshipping Chris uncritically. He challenged Chris when his judgment was impaired by trauma, made tactical decisions Chris was too emotionally compromised to make, and essentially kept Chris functional through sheer force of will. Piers demonstrated leadership qualities that Chris had recognized during recruitment: the ability to make difficult decisions, the willingness to confront authority when necessary, and the courage to continue fighting even when circumstances seemed hopeless. The mission led them to an underwater research facility where House, a massive bioweapon, was being prepared for global deployment. Chris and Piers fought through infected and bioweapons to reach the facility's destruction mechanism, but during the final battle, Piers was severely injured by a bioweapon attack that mutated his right arm with C virus infection. The facility was flooding, and only one of them could escape using the single-person escape pod available. Chris, as the senior officer, intended to stay behind and ensure the facility's destruction, ordering Piers to escape, but Piers recognized that Chris had decades of experience the BSAA still needed, that losing Chris would cripple the organization, and that his own infection was progressing rapidly. Piers made his choice. He shoved Chris into the escape pod, sealing it before Chris could protest. As the C virus spread through his body, Piers used his mutating arm's electrical abilities to destroy Chaos and power the facility's self-destruct mechanism. He stayed behind, knowing the flooding and explosion would kill him, choosing to sacrifice himself so Chris could survive and continue leading the BSAA. Chris watched helplessly through the pod's window as Piers used the last of his strength to ensure the mission's success. Piers gave Chris a final salute, a gesture acknowledging their partnership and Chris's leadership, before the pod sealed completely and began its ascent. The facility exploded with Piers still inside, his body consumed by the destruction he'd triggered. Piers Nivens died at 25 years old, having served with the BSA for less than 3 years. But his sacrifice saved Chris's life and prevented the C virus from spreading globally. More importantly, his death gave Chris purpose again. Chris had been drowning in survivor's guilt and considering retirement, but Piers's belief in him, his insistence that Chris was needed, and his ultimate sacrifice all reminded Chris why the fight mattered. Piers became the symbol of the next generation of BSAA operatives, skilled, dedicated, willing to sacrifice everything for the mission. His death devastated Chris, adding another name to the long list of people Chris had lost to bioterrorism. But it also reinforced Chris's commitment to the BSAA's mission, ensuring that Pierre's sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. Helena Harper, the agent who made a terrible choice. Helena Harper was born in the 1980s, growing up with her younger sister Deborah. Their parents died when they were young, leaving Helena as Deborah's primary guardian and protector. Helena developed an intensely strong sense of justice and responsibility, traits that led her to law enforcement career. She joined the Central Intelligence Agency, demonstrating exceptional field agent capabilities. Helena was proactive, dedicated, and driven by an unwavering moral compass. She couldn't tolerate injustice or corruption, which made her an effective agent but also created problems. Helena's emotional investment in cases sometimes overrode her tactical judgment. She wanted to protect victims so intensely that she occasionally crossed professional boundaries. During a serial murder investigation, Helena apprehended the suspect with exceptional skill, but after capturing him, she witnessed him taunting the victims' families without remorse. Helena lost control, beating the suspect with excessive violence that resulted in her suspension. When questioned, she stated simply that she couldn't remain quiet while the offender ranted in front of grieving families. The incident revealed Helena's fundamental character. She was someone whose sense of justice sometimes overrode procedural requirements, who cared more about protecting victims than following protocol. After her return from suspension, Helena's pattern continued. When Deborah's boyfriend became violent during a breakup, injuring Deborah, Helena shot him. The shooting was ruled justifiable, but the emotional motivation behind it concerned her superiors. Helena was demoted from field operative to a support position in the United States Secret Service, essentially ending her promising career with the CIA. She was assigned to protect President Adam Benford, a position that seemed like punishment rather than genuine responsibility. Helena's dreams of joining the Division of Security Operations, recommended by her CIA evaluator Ingrid Hannigan, evaporated with her demotion, but Helena's greatest vulnerability was her love for Deborah. That vulnerability was exploited by Derek Simmons, a powerful government official conducting illegal bioweapon research. Simmons wanted to prevent President Benford from revealing the truth about Raccoon City's destruction and the government's involvement with bioweapons programs. He needed someone close to the president to facilitate an assassination. Simmons kidnapped Deborah, holding her hostage and offering Helena an impossible choice: cooperate with his plan to unleash a bioterror attack at the president's speech, or watch Deborah die. Helena had dedicated her life to protecting people, to serving justice, to stopping criminals. But faced with losing her only family, she broke. Helena provided Simmons with access codes and security information that allowed C-virus to be released during President Benford's speech in Tall Oaks on June 29, 2013. The virus spread rapidly through the crowd, transforming attendees into zombies within minutes. President Benford, Helena's protectee, was infected and attacked her. Helena watched the man she was supposed to protect transform into a monster because of her betrayal. Leon Kennedy, another DSO agent attending the speech, fought his way to Helena through the infected crowd. Together they escaped the initial outbreak, but Helena carried crushing guilt. She'd enabled a bioterror attack that killed thousands, had betrayed her duty, and had destroyed her own moral integrity by choosing her sister over countless innocent lives. Helena told Leon everything, confessing her role in the attack and begging for his help rescuing Deborah. Leon, despite every reason to arrest Helena immediately, chose to help her. He recognized that Helena had been manipulated, that Simmons had exploited her love for family, and that she genuinely wanted to stop the man who'd used her. They fought through tall oaks as the C virus outbreak spread, eventually reaching the underground cathedral where Simmons had hidden Deborah. But they arrived too late. Simmons had already infected Deborah with a mutative strain of C virus, transforming her into a monstrous bioweapon. Helena found her sister, the person she'd betrayed everything to save, twisted into a creature that no longer recognized her. Deborah attacked them, controlled by the virus, alternating between moments of lucidity, where she begged for death, and violent episodes where she tried to kill Helena. The fight ended with Deborah's death, Helena forced to watch her sister, the person she'd sacrificed everything to protect, die as a monster. The tragedy was complete. Helena had enabled mass murder to save Deborah, and Deborah died anyway, making the entire betrayal pointless. But Helena didn't collapse into despair. Instead, she channeled her guilt into determination to stop Simmons and prevent further attacks. She and Leon pursued Simmons across multiple countries as he attempted to complete his plan for global bioterror. Helena fought with desperate intensity, driven by the need to make her betrayal mean something, to prevent other families from suffering as hers had. They eventually cornered and killed Simmons, ending his conspiracy and exposing his crimes. Helena surrendered to authorities, expecting prosecution for her role in the Tall Oaks attack, but Leon testified on her behalf, explaining the coercion and Helena's efforts to stop Simmons afterward. The government, eager to avoid public scrutiny of Simmons's illegal activities, offered Helena a deal: continue working for the DSO, using her skills to fight bioterrorism, or face trial and imprisonment. Helena accepted, trading her freedom for the opportunity to fight the threats she'd once facilitated. She became a DSO operative, working alongside Leon on subsequent missions, carrying permanent guilt over Tall Oaks, but channeling that guilt into protecting others. Her story was one of terrible choices and attempted redemption, demonstrating that people manipulated into evil actions can still choose to fight for good, even when forgiveness seems impossible. Parker Luciani, from FBC to BSAA. Parker Luciani was born in the 1970s to an Italian family with roots in England. He grew up with a strong sense of duty and a desire to protect people from threats they couldn't fight themselves. This drive led him to join the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, the FBC, one of the first international organizations created to combat biological terrorism after Raccoon City's destruction. Parker was an effective FBC agent, skilled in combat and dedicated to the mission. He worked alongside other operatives, including Jessica Sherwatt, forming professional partnerships based on shared danger. In 2004, Parker was deployed during the Terra Grigia Panic, a bioterror attack on the floating city of Terra Grigia that resulted in the city's complete destruction. The Terra Grigia Panic exposed the FBC's corruption. Parker discovered that decisions were being made not to protect civilians, but to enhance the FBC's political power and influence. The organization allowed situations to deteriorate before intervening, maximizing the appearance of threat to justify increased funding and authority. Civilians died because the FBC prioritized optics over effective response. The revelation devastated Parker. He joined the FBC believing they were genuinely committed to fighting bioterrorism, that protecting people was the primary mission. Learning that politics and power games took precedence over civilian lives violated everything Parker valued. He tried drowning his disillusionment in alcohol, struggling with the knowledge that he'd served an organization that allowed people to die for political advantage. Eventually, Parker made a decision. He transferred to the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, in 2010. The BSAA was known for prioritizing mission effectiveness over politics, for actually caring about protecting people rather than accumulating power. Parker hoped the organization would provide the sense of purpose the FBC had failed to deliver. In 2005, Parker was assigned to partner with Jill Valentine, investigating reports that Chris Redfield and Jessica Sherwatt had disappeared while pursuing the bioterrorist organization Veltro. The mission took them to the Queen Zenobia, a cruise ship adrift in the Mediterranean that had become a floating nightmare of infected and bioweapons. Parker proved himself a capable partner. He was methodical, reliable, and completely dedicated to protecting Jill during their investigation. He trusted his partners, perhaps too much. When Jessica reappeared claiming to have been working undercover, Parker accepted her explanation without suspicion. His former FBC colleagues seemed genuine, and Parker wanted to believe the people he worked with were trustworthy. The mission revealed a conspiracy involving the FBC's leadership. Parker discovered that FBC Director Morgan Lansdale had secretly created Veltro, orchestrating the Terra Grigia panic to justify the FBC's existence and increase its power. The bioterror attack that had killed thousands was actually a false flag operation designed to make the FBC seem essential. Parker's disillusionment with the FBC proved justified. The organization he'd served was fundamentally corrupt from the top, willing to murder its own citizens for political gain. But his decision to transfer to the BSAA meant he was in position to expose Lansdale's crimes and prevent further manipulation. During the mission's climax, Jessica Sherwatt revealed herself as Lansdale's agent, shooting Parker and leaving him to die as the Queen Zenobia sank. Jessica, Parker's former colleague and someone he'd trusted, betrayed him without hesitation. Parker was severely wounded, trapped on a sinking ship, seemingly doomed, but Parker survived through determination and the BSAA's rescue efforts. He recovered from his injuries, his faith in people damaged but not destroyed by Jessica's betrayal. Parker remained with the BSAA, continuing to fight bioterrorism despite the physical and emotional scars from the Queen Zenobia incident. Parker Luciani represented the struggle to maintain integrity in corrupt systems. He joined organizations dedicated to fighting bioterrorism, only to discover them compromised by politics and power games. But rather than becoming cynical or abandoning the mission, Parker transferred to an organization that better reflected his values, continuing to fight despite betrayals and disillusionment. His story showed that heroism sometimes meant recognizing when institutions fail their purpose and having the courage to find better alternatives. Moira Burton, Overcoming Fear and Legacy. Moira Burton was born in 1991, the eldest daughter of Barry and Kathy Burton. She grew up in Raccoon City while her father served with STARS, living a relatively normal childhood despite her father's dangerous profession. Moira was a caring older sister to Polly, protective and loving in typical sibling fashion. The Spencer Mansion incident in 1998 changed Moira's childhood. Albert Wesker threatened Barry's family to ensure his cooperation, and while the threats never materialized, Moira learned that her father's work made the entire family targets. After the incident, Barry relocated the family to Canada, hoping to provide safety and distance from Umbrella's reach. Several years later, Moira experienced the trauma that defined her character. She and Polly discovered that Barry had accidentally left his gun case unlocked. Moira, curious and careless, took out a loaded pistol. While playing with the weapon, it discharged, shooting Polly and leaving her bleeding on the floor. Moira was hysterical, traumatized by the sight of her sister's blood and the knowledge that she'd nearly killed Polly through her carelessness. Polly survived, but the incident created a profound rift between Moira and Barry. Moira blamed her father for leaving guns accessible, while Barry struggled with guilt over failing to secure his weapons properly. More significantly, the incident left Moira with an intense fear of firearms. She couldn't handle guns without experiencing panic attacks, couldn't even look at weapons without reliving the moment she'd shot her sister. Moira's fear was complicated by her father's identity. Barry Burton was famous in anti-bioterror circles as a weapons expert, someone whose knowledge of firearms was encyclopedic and whose career was built around them. Moira's phobia represented rejection of her father's legacy, a barrier between them that neither knew how to cross. As Moira grew older, she rebelled against her father's overprotectiveness and expectations. She dyed her hair, adopted an alternative appearance, used profanity freely, and generally positioned herself as opposite to everything Barry represented. But beneath the rebellion was genuine desire for purpose. Moira wanted to help people, to make a difference, to prove she was more than just Barry Burton's damaged daughter. Through her friendship with Claire Redfield, Moira joined TerraSave, the humanitarian organization providing relief to bioterror victims. The work suited her. She could help people without needing firearms, could contribute to fighting bioterrorism through aid and advocacy rather than combat. Moira found purpose and community with TerraSave, finally feeling like she belonged somewhere. In 2011, that belonging was shattered. During a party at TerraSave headquarters, Moira and several colleagues, including Claire, were kidnapped by Alex Wesker's organization. They woke on an isolated island, fitted with bracelets monitoring their fear levels, forced to navigate an environment designed to terrify them as part of Alex's psychological experiments. Moira was partnered with Claire, forced to support someone who was actually capable of fighting, while she remained paralyzed by fear whenever they encountered weapons. Her bracelet measured fear constantly, with Alex's recorded voice mocking her terror. Moira had to confront the reality that her phobia made her a liability, that Claire was protecting her rather than them functioning as equal partners. The island's horrors intensified. They encountered infected creatures, deadly traps, and situations requiring combat capability Moira couldn't provide. Her fear bracelet glowed brighter with each terrifying encounter, measuring her psychological breakdown for Alex's research. Moira felt useless, ashamed, desperate to contribute, but unable to overcome the phobia that defined her. Eventually, circumstances forced a confrontation with her fear. Claire was incapacitated, helpless before an infected creature, about to be killed. Moira found a gun, the only weapon available. She had to choose: let Claire die to avoid touching the weapon, or overcome her phobia to save her friend. Moira picked up the gun. Her hands shook, panic attack threatening to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to aim and fire. The shot missed, her inexperience and terror making accuracy impossible, but the noise distracted the creature long enough for Claire to recover. Moira had finally overcome her fear, not perfectly, but enough to take action when someone she cared about needed help. But the story didn't end with Moira's triumph. After escaping one facility, she was separated from Claire and left alone on the island. For 6 months, Moira survived in the wilderness, learning to hunt, scavenge, and defend herself. She befriended an old man named Evgeny, who'd been living on the island for years, learning survival skills and developing genuine capability rather than simply overcoming fear. When Barry arrived on the island searching for his daughter, Moira saved him from Alex Wesker's mutated form. The reunion was emotional. Barry saw that his daughter had survived, and become genuinely capable, while Moira finally understood that her father's weapons obsession came from the same desire to protect people that motivated her TerraSave work. Moira Burton's story was about overcoming trauma and finding strength that doesn't require being like your parents. She learned to handle firearms not because she embraced her father's legacy, but because circumstances demanded capability. She found her own path helping people through aid work rather than combat, proving that heroism takes many forms, and that the best way to honor family legacy is by staying true to your own values while developing the courage to act when necessary. Natalia Korda, the quiet child with two souls. Natalia Korda was born around 2005, experiencing tragedy at an impossibly young age. During a bioterror attack on her hometown, Natalia watched her parents die, leaving her orphaned at approximately 5 years old. The trauma was severe enough that Natalia stopped speaking entirely, retreating into selective mutism as a defense mechanism against overwhelming grief. She was placed in an orphanage that specialized in children traumatized by bioterror incidents. There were enough such victims by the 2000s that specialized facilities existed to care for them. In the orphanage, Natalia remained isolated, communicating through gestures and expressions but never speaking. The other children and staff gave her space, understanding that some trauma runs too deep for words. In 2011, when Natalia was approximately 6 years old, Alex Wesker's organization kidnapped her along with other test subjects. Alex was conducting experiments to achieve immortality through consciousness transfer, searching for the perfect host body to house her mind. She needed a compatible subject, someone young, psychologically damaged in specific ways, and capable of containing her consciousness without rejecting it. Natalia was the perfect candidate. Her selective mutism indicated psychological vulnerability. Her young age meant Alex's consciousness could integrate before Natalia's personality fully developed, and her genetic compatibility made rejection unlikely. Alex conducted her experiments, transferring her consciousness into Natalia's mind and leaving what she believed was her original body to die. But the transfer was incomplete. Natalia retained her own consciousness alongside Alex's presence, creating a situation where two minds inhabited one body. Natalia remained herself, the quiet, gentle child who perceived the world through intuition and emotion. But beneath her consciousness, Alex's mind lingered, waiting for the opportunity to emerge and subsume Natalia's identity completely. Natalia was left on the island when Alex believed the transfer complete, expected to eventually become just Alex wearing a child's body. Instead, Natalia was found by Moira Burton, who took the child under her protection. When Barry arrived searching for Moira, he encountered Natalia and couldn't abandon a traumatized child on an island of horrors. Natalia demonstrated unusual abilities during their escape. She could sense threats before they appeared, perceive creatures that others couldn't see until too late, and intuitively understand dangerous situations. These abilities came from Alex's consciousness, the scientific genius's mind granting Natalia perception beyond normal human limits. But Natalia used these abilities to protect others, to help Moira and Barry survive, demonstrating that consciousness transfer hadn't destroyed her essential goodness. The group escaped the island together, with Barry formally adopting Natalia afterward. She became part of the Burton family, Moira's younger sister, Barry's adopted daughter. Natalia slowly began speaking again, the stability and safety of a genuine family allowing her to emerge from her trauma-induced silence. She was a quiet, gentle presence in the Burton household, loved and protected by people who understood her suffering. But Alex's consciousness remained dormant in Natalia's mind, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. Years later, in 2014, something triggered Alex's consciousness. Natalia's personality was temporarily suppressed as Alex took control, attempting to complete the transfer and eliminate Natalia entirely. But Natalia fought back, her consciousness refusing to be erased, her will to exist and protect her family, giving her the strength to resist. The struggle between Natalia and Alex played out in the Megamycete realm, a mental landscape where both consciousnesses battled for dominance. Natalia, aided by her family's love and her own determination, ultimately defeated Alex's consciousness, ensuring that she would remain herself rather than becoming a vessel for someone else's immortality. Natalia Corda's story was about the resilience of children and the power of found family. She'd experienced trauma that silenced her, been used as a host for another person's consciousness, and fought to maintain her own identity against someone vastly more powerful. But through it all, Natalia remained gentle, kind, protective of others, demonstrating that suffering doesn't have to corrupt innocence, and that love and support can help even the most damaged survivors find their voice again. The legacy of those who fought. These are the stories of people who stood against bioterror, who fought impossible odds, who survived horrors that shouldn't exist. Some were trained soldiers, others ordinary civilians. Some were veterans of endless wars against bioweapons. Others faced terror only once before returning to normal life. But all of them shared one characteristic. They refused to quit when quitting would have been easier, safer, more rational. Rebecca Chambers, the prodigy who proved age doesn't determine courage. Billy Cohen, the framed Marine who found redemption. Chris Redfield, who spent decades fighting because stopping wasn't in his nature. Jill Valentine, whose Delta Force training prepared her for everything except betrayal by those she trusted. Leon Kennedy, the rookie cop transformed into a cynical government agent who never stopped protecting people despite personal cost. Claire Redfield, who proved heroism doesn't require training, just determination. Ada Wong, walking moral ambiguity personified, driven by motives even she might not fully understand. Barry Burton, the family man who found courage in love rather than ideology. Ethan Winters, the everyman who remained ordinary even while accomplishing extraordinary things. Sheva Alomar, who transformed personal tragedy into professional dedication. Carlos Oliveira, finding his conscience in the middle of apocalypse. Jake Muller, proving that biology isn't destiny. Piers Nivens, sacrificing himself so others could continue the fight. Helena Harper, making terrible choices and spending the rest of her life earning redemption. Parker Luciani, maintaining integrity despite institutional corruption. Moira Burton, overcoming trauma and legacy to find her own path. Natalia Corda, fighting to remain herself against overwhelming pressure to become someone else. Their stories span decades, from 1998's Spencer Mansion incident through the 2030s and beyond. Some are still fighting, aging veterans carrying decades of trauma. Others died protecting those they loved, their sacrifices ensuring survival for others. A few disappeared, choosing peaceful lives away from bioterror's endless conflict. But all of them changed the world's relationship with biological weapons, forcing governments to acknowledge threats they'd prefer to ignore, exposing corporations willing to murder for profit, and proving that ordinary people can survive extraordinary horror through courage and determination. The Resident Evil franchise is ultimately about these people, not the corporations or viruses or conspiracies, but the individuals who refuse to let bioterror go unchallenged. Each brought different strengths and faced different horrors, but all shared the determination to protect others regardless of personal cost. Their stories remind us that heroism isn't about superpowers or destiny. It's about the choice to stand and fight when every instinct screams to run, to protect strangers who will never know your name, to continue resisting evil even when victory seems impossible. These are the protagonists who fought through outbreaks, confronted monsters, exposed conspiracies, and saved countless lives. These are their backstories, the moments that forged them, the choices that defined them, and the nightmares that proved their courage. May their stories provide comfort as you drift toward sleep, knowing that even in fiction's darkest corners, ordinary people found extraordinary strength when circumstances demanded it. Rest well, knowing that even imaginary heroes can inspire real courage